Good morning, everyone. If you can take your seats, we'll get started. Everyone, we're a bit smaller today, but good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Welcome to the first meeting of Community and Protective Services Committee for this year, 2020. I look forward this year to continuing our work together to promote a safe and healthy community. We have a few items on the agenda today, a bit of a lighter agenda for us this time around, but we do have the new Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit. This is the third envelope of provincially administered funding under the National Housing Strategy that will benefit Ottawa residents. This funding will provide $4.3 million to vulnerable groups, including survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking, and people experiencing or at risk of homelessness to help them pay for housing costs. We'll also consider a recommendation on policies to guide the new framework for the community funding program. You may recall that Council approved the new framework back in September, and it will take effect in January of 2021. That's really a summary of what we have for today. So with that, I'll move on to the agenda. Any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes, the minutes from November 15th, 2019. Carried? The minutes from November 20th. Okay. The first item, which is a status update on inquiries and motions.
I have a question to staff.
Okay, I'll just hold it. I'll go through and come back. There we go. The second item, which is the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit. On that report.
Is there a presentation on it? Or?
There's not on this one, no.
Okay, I have questions.
Questions, so I'll hold it. The third item, we have a presentation happening. The fourth item, accountability agreements with the Champlain Local Health Integration Network. Okay, on that report, carried, received, carried. Okay, then we have a councillor's item, donation of surplus snowmobile.
Question to that, can we be informed as a committee if there are others? Because we do have winter trails and people are asking for snowmobiles, so I'm glad to support the report,
okay.
But I don't know if there's snowmobiles in the stock somewhere. Is that something that we can be made aware?
We'll come back to that one then. So I'll go back to the first item, which was the status update, committee inquiries and motions, and a question from Councillor Fleury.
I do have a question, Madam Chair. I don't know if it's to you or to the clerk. It relates to, when we formed this committee in the new council, we talked about reporting of shelter and motel numbers. And I thought that we were going to start getting a regular report of those numbers at this committee. Yet I have not seen a memo or a report come through. And when I see in the inquiry segment, it says that a report or a memo was sent on February 2019, but I'm sorry, to me it didn't speak of the numbers. So I just want to clarify if this committee is going to get regular numbers on shelter and motel use.
Fair question, and I see Shelley coming up to the mic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to the councillor's inquiry, yes, we will start reporting to this committee, and I think it was specifically in regards to chronic shelter use and the inflow of people into chronic shelter use compared to the overall shelter population. So we did roll up numbers over 2018 to 2019, so we'll roll them up now at the end of the year, and we can bring an IPD or something to let you know what those numbers are in regards to chronic homelessness.
And are you able, so great going backwards, but are you able to start putting in place the reporting of this on the same year, like a quarterly or?
I think it was biannually is probably the best way to do it. So yes, we can set it up so that we provide the information biannually to this committee.
Okay, so our reporting, we could expect something in June at the latest for the first phase? Is that?
Yes, that's correct. We can do that.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, so on the report, received?
Received.
Okay, on to the second report, Canada-Ontario Housing Benefits. Questions on that? Again, Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. So I just want to understand, we've established criteria as to who we're giving those amounts, and I didn't see the word families, and it worried me. There's some hints of families when we talk of fleeing situations of violence as a priority, but we didn't use the term family. So because of the motel situation, I really wanted to understand if we saw that population could benefit from the, I guess, the $1.9 million in the first year.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So certainly with regards to the category related to those either fleeing violence or those at risk or are currently homeless, it does include it's either sole single females or female-led families with children. So definitely it does include the families in that category. So based on the priority group as well, those that are in the shelters, the female-led families in the shelters would qualify, yes.
Okay. And what would be the range? I don't know if you have the exact number, but what would be an amount for an individual or a parent with a young child? What would be the amount that would be attributable through this program?
Okay. So based on what is outlined in the report, we have had a similar program that is sunsetting for victims of domestic violence. So we have a good analysis of what we anticipate the average will be, because it's the same program, so to speak. So on a per family basis, the average is about $560 benefit per month. And we expect it'll be similar demographics.
Okay. And then as a final question to this, we had last year another program, Rent Supplement. We had some challenges of spending it because of the low vacancy in the rental market. How does this differ? I wanted to better understand. So we have a program, we have a rental capacity issue. The individuals, if they're housed, we're able to have that portable allowance, but if they're not housed, we still need to find the vacancy, or we still need to identify the vacancy so they're housed and then add the amount. So I'm just curious to see how we feel the housing benefit is any different from the rent sup in this context.
Thank you. So with regards to a rent supplement, specifically it's tied to, for the most part, stock that already exists or landlords that are already in the program. With regards to the housing benefit, the difference being the household has the opportunity to go out and find their own unit within the private sector. It doesn't have to be it's not within the rent sup portfolio. And certainly the programs that have been running for the last few years, that is where the greatest success has been in being able to support households. So they go out into the private sector, find a market unit, and then this would be layered on top of that. And that is, over the last few years, that really is where the growth has been, where people have had the opportunity to actually find housing. Also within this report, in the second year of the program, we do have a housing benefit program that is sunsetting. So they're already in situ. They're already housed, and this would support them as that program transitions out so that they get to maintain that housing.
Yeah, no, I saw that. That was important. Okay, you opened an interesting question to me. So we feel that the housing benefit is a better option than the rent supplement. Is what you're under the current housing environment that we feel it's more effective.
In this environment where we tend to have low vacancy, and most importantly, we have very low turnover in our community housing stock, which is what is dependent on the rent supplement program and our traditional rent geared to income subsidies. This is certainly what we've experienced for the last few years. People have significantly more opportunity to be housed successfully and more rapidly. There's no doubt about it, yes.
Back to my initial question. So if this committee really wanted to prioritize families, what could we do today? I mean, you have to have the delegation of authority to be able to ensure the delivery of the amounts and get to as many households as possible. But if we were to say, hey, we really want as a primary goal to house those families in motels, how would we go about it? Is today's direction sufficient, or do we need?
Certainly, Madam Chair, certainly right now in the family shelter system, I mean, we do have families that are waiting for rent geared to income housing, but we've been offering a housing allowance program in the family shelter system for the last 3 years. It's a tiered housing allowance program, so $250 plus $50 for each additional family member. So that's been really successful in helping us move people through the family shelter system. Just for context, we help about anywhere between 550 to 600 families every year transition through the family shelter system to permanent housing. So there is movement and churn through the system right now. Unfortunately, the demand on the other end and people moving to our city or emigrating to our city is significant. So people are moving into rent geared to income housing. People do have the option of a City of Ottawa housing subsidy program that we're currently running, and now we have this additional new program which gives us even further funds to work with to try and create further momentum to move people into housing.
So you feel that today's direction is sufficient to prioritize? I mean, I'm taking my stand. I want us to house families. So what could we do more today to ensure that is our top priority?
Madam Chair, I think doing more would require additional funding from other levels of government. I mean, this is a very small amount of funding that we've received under this new program. We've only received a 2-year allocation. We know that it's supposed to increase over time. But certainly, if we're looking, to rents are increasing. So, I mean, a benefit of $560, I mean, that's the average benefit we're anticipating. Is that really enough to help families get stably into the rental market and be in a position to cover all those other necessities for their families? So to do more, we need more funding.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Egline?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the clarification, because I had an inquiry offline, because when I first read the report, I sort of came to the same conclusion that Councillor Furry did. So thank you for explaining that there's a second set of funding, if you will, that responds to families and the details around that. But if I can just build on your last comment, what you seem to be saying is, even within that second set of funding, which we have been using to assist families out of the shelter system and into more sustainable, affordable housing, you seem to be saying you're helping 500 or so families every year, but you feel that the amount of the supplement, if you will, based on the funding you're getting from other levels of government is not sufficient, or will not be sufficient going forward. Is that fair?
Madam Chair, I think that's a fair assessment. We know what CMHC posts as the average market rents for 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom units, but we know that's not really what they're going for here in the City of Ottawa in a very competitive rental market. So families who may not be working and living on social assistance, an extra benefit of $560 may get them there, but will it keep them there, and will it keep them stably housed? So I certainly think, in a high-demand rental market, a higher amount of subsidy would help that families achieve that stability.
And is there something that we can do today that perhaps the chair and the mayor together a letter, something like that, or a motion that we could pass that would send the message to the other levels of government. I'm looking to you for direction in this, and I haven't talked to the chair about this, but I suspect she's supportive of this kind of approach. So is there something that you concrete that you could suggest that would say, hey, this is a great program, other levels of government, but in today's economy, the dollars are not sufficient? Is there something we could do?
Madam Chair, I would suggest that the place to do that will be when we bring the housing and homelessness plan forward. Because I think what's important about this report today is this one piece of funding this year is an amount with a program that is evolving with the provincial government, and we don't have a full sense of what's going to be the full allocation of that program over time. And I think in the housing and homelessness plan, which this committee is going to debate on March 27th, will really be the place that you'll see what we project is going to be the need over the longer period of time, that we would send as a comprehensive package both to the province and to the feds in an ask of what the needs are in this community and how we would respond. So I really think that is the time and place to do that when we debate the full plan.
Sure, Councillor McKenney?
Thank you. I just want to pick up on that. The one issue that I would have with is timing. I mean, the federal government right now is looking at, is out consulting on their federal budget, and that will happen in March. So I'm guessing these two things are going to happen at the same time, and we'll miss out on a full year of funding. So I wonder if direction maybe to the chair, the mayor, to put forward. I mean, we'll spend any amount of money. I don't think that we should wait and miss a full year. I worry a little bit about that. So why don't we make a budget submission, maybe a direction to from committee to the mayor to put forward a budget submission for the 2020 federal budget. I don't know if that's who could answer that question. It's not to, I guess it's not to staff here. I understand what you're saying, that you'll, with the plan, we'll have a long-range financial plan, and that's what we've asked for. But I do worry about the timing because, like everything, you know, it just keeps getting pushed off another year, and then we're in 2021 and we didn't get the funding we need for 2020. We know, you know, we had 2 federal ministers go out yesterday and make an announcement with CMHC about private funding to a private developer that's going to give us 65 pseudo-affordable units, and they think that that is success. And I think that we really have to, as a city, we are falling further and further behind every single day. And I think that we have to at least put the pressure on the federal government. Everywhere I go, people ask me what the city is doing, and you know, it's not that there isn't a role for us. We have a lot of things that we can do, but we can't come up with $20 or $30 million this year. Or maybe we can, but we have to. So we either ask the feds for it, or we find a way of doing that ourselves. So is that direction maybe that I can provide?
Yes, and I think, you know, building on the meeting that we had along with the mayor, with the minister a month or so back, and the memo that we provided at that time, I think we have made strides towards those budget asks. So I think that's already in motion at the moment. Worthy of a further discussion of what's next is certainly appreciated.
But I would like to give direction then for this committee to request that the mayor, yourself, myself, work with staff on at least a preliminary budget submission to the federal government as they are contemplating their 2020 budget today.
Okay. Noted. Okay. So noting that's a direction, is that carried? Okay. Any further questions on this report? Seeing none. Carried? Carried. Okay. The next item is a community funding framework, policy statements, and next steps. And I believe Clara Friere and team have a presentation for us. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair and committee. So it is a pleasure to be here today to speak to you about the second phase of our community funding framework review, an important phase, which is our community funding policy statements. I'll start with just a bit of a quick overview. We undertook this review based on significant feedback from the nonprofit sector, as well as the fact that since 2006, there hadn't been any real thorough, systematic review of the community funding framework. And in 2020, our current funding envelope is $24.6 million, and that includes a cost of living increase, as well as a $100,000 project fund that was approved in the last budget for 2020. As part of the 2020 budget, there was also a $500,000 one-time transition fund approved to assist us through this next phase of our framework, which is the allocation phase. The goal of the community funding framework review, if you recall, was to look at how we could use this funding framework to sustain a healthy social infrastructure through a funding program that meets existing priority needs, but at the same time offering enough flexibility to address emerging needs as they come along. And in September of 2019, Council approved our new funding framework, and this responds to, this is a framework that responds to community needs and feedback from over 200 members of the nonprofit social service sector that we consulted. It integrates flexibility and a focus on sustainability. It has a clear vision, mission, mandate, and a focus on equity-based principles that came from all of the consultations that we undertook. It'll support a more equitable distribution of funding across the sector, and importantly, has 3 key funding priorities responding to the community needs based on that research and the environmental scan that was undertaken. These are poverty reduction, community development, and social infrastructure. Our community funding program, beginning in 2021, will include 3 key funding streams: a sustainability fund, which is the longer term, formerly known as renewable funding. It is moving to a 5-year term. The community fund, which includes project funding of 1 year, as well as 3-year project funding, with a mechanism to move agencies onto sustainability funding if the funding exists and the priority needs are still pronounced. This also includes, which is new, civic events funding, which was a transfer from Recreation, Culture, and Facility Services recreation funding. And then thirdly, the emerging and emerging needs stream, which includes our capital program, our emergency funding, and a new, more flexible emergency community needs stream. So as required under the city's grants and contributions bylaw, today we really want to speak to you about what's before you in the report, which is our community funding policy statements. These outline the funding program, descriptions, principles, eligibility criteria, decision-making process, allowable and ineligible costs, reporting and monitoring requirements for each of the funding envelopes. It also enables our team to adjust funding between envelopes as time goes on, as needed, to meet priority needs as they appear. Overall, regarding the eligibility criteria, there are no significant changes. The allocations process that's outlined in the policy statements take into consideration alignment to funding priorities, allocations that align to priority equity groups and the needs of those groups, and the priority needs of communities. The allocations process looks at existing needs where they're most pronounced, which was a key principle of our funding review, and we'll use geographic mapping and research to undertake that. Flexibility is also integrated to consider the needs of underrepresented groups, such as Indigenous groups, GLBTQ+ groups, for whom less robust census data exists. So we have a mechanism to ensure that their needs are also identified and not ignored. And we will undertake an objective, transparent, and accountable systemic evaluation process. These policy statements will guide allocations of the new community funding framework, again, coming into effect in 2021, which is the final phase and the closeout phase of this review. And we are currently developing evaluation framework and new outcomes that will be tied specifically to the funding goals. So I would like to walk you through some of the key changes that are different in the new proposed policy statements compared to the previous ones. As I mentioned, the eligibility criteria overall is not changed. In terms of the sustainability fund, so the 5-year renewable fund, this is going to be the first time in the history of the program that we are opening this fund up to allocations, as most agencies were originally grandfathered into the program post-amalgamation. Proposals will go through a standard allocations committee process, which will use an objective decision-making process, as I just mentioned, for the prioritization and selection of eligible proposals. It also includes corporate initiatives funding, and this comprises programs and initiatives that were approved by City Council to be managed by our community development and funding branch as term of council priorities. These include the Community Development Framework, Community Garden Allocations Fund, Ottawa Youth Engagement Committee, and the SnowGo program. Under the Community Fund, which is essentially our project stream, the most significant change is the 3-year project funding envelope. It will allow organizations to build their capacity, establish a track record, and demonstrate their ability to respond to emerging needs. After 3 years, agencies could be considered for the Sustainability Fund if the funding envelope allows, community needs persist, and based on an assessment application process. For this reason, the 3-year project funding is only available to agencies not in receipt of the sustainability funding. There will be no changes for the 1-year project funding, so that is existing now. And the civic events funding is a program, as I mentioned, recently transferred from community funding from the Recreation Culture Facility Services Department, recreation funding, and this fund will allow this fund will align to the new community funding framework priorities, but other than that, no new significant changes to that fund. Under the Emergency and Emerging Needs Fund, which is a brand new fund that we're introducing, brand new stream, it includes the capital funding, which was historically only available to community health and resource centers. This will now be available to any agency that meets our eligibility criteria. The Emerging Community Needs Funding is a new envelope designed to provide maximum flexibility to address emerging needs in a timely manner, and this funding will be directed to priority neighborhood initiatives or community initiatives responding to an urgent or emerging need. Emergency funding will be available to agencies receiving funding under either the Sustainability Fund stream or the Community Fund, which is a shorter project stream, the project funding element only. And historically, this has only been available to agencies receiving renewable funding. And then finally, we're proposing as well in 2021 to move $150,000 from the existing older adult plan internally facing budget of $500,000 to the community fund. Over the last 9 years, city departments have committed to support the OAP actions within their current operational budgets to the extent possible. And it's expected with this reduced pressure on the OAP budget that now is a good time to reallocate this $150,000 of the $500,000 internally facing budget to our community fund and prioritize needs of seniors that are community facing. This will build on the successes of the OAP by supporting nonprofit community agencies with age-friendly, community-based initiatives that respond to the emerging needs, priorities of older adults, isolated residents across the city. So the timelines and transition times for the implementation of the allocations process. Upon receiving council approval of the policy statements, we will begin implementation of the new community funding framework, starting with allocating the sustainability fund, the longer-term renewable funding. This will begin with an allocations process in early March and ending in June. All current funded agencies have been notified of this allocation process and the timelines, and will continue to receive updates from us as we go along. We are also planning information sessions in the month of April to support agencies with their proposal writing, which includes some will include some workshops on actual proposal writing. Final allocations will be made at the end of Q2, at the end of June is our expectation. At that point, we will begin transition planning with agencies whose funding levels will change under the new community funding framework to support them with their transition needs. This could include using a portion of the $500,000 transition fund approved by council in the last budget. That funding will all be committed before the end of 2020. More importantly, staff will contact each agency affected and work one-on-one with those agencies to develop their transition plans and bridge them to support them as necessary. In the meantime, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be working on our internal processes, including an evaluation and outcome measurement framework, which will be new to our program, and the new operational policies and procedures that are required under our program. So that's the bulk of my presentation. Before ending, I just want to acknowledge Sarah Mullen, who's beside me, who's done quite a significant amount of work on this funding review, as well as Manuela Popovici, who did a significant amount of work on the report and has been supporting the project, and the whole community funding team, who you can imagine are heavily invested in supporting agencies through this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor McKenney?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for this. I know it was a tremendous amount of work, and it's not an easy task that we gave you to go out and consider funding for our nonprofits, all of whom really are doing work for us out there in our community, reducing poverty, reducing food insecurity, providing programming for families, for kids. It's so closely aligned with what we were just talking about with housing. Housing, when we talk about housing emergency, it's about two things. It's about poverty and a shortage of affordable housing. So the answer is, more housing and less poverty. So you're in the less poverty business. And so just a couple of questions, and I think, do we have delegations coming up as well? No, okay. Okay, so I'll just unload completely. Don't tweet that. One quick question that I had on the, you had talked about the portion of the older adult plan funding going to community funding. How does that work? So what are the numbers and how does that get moved about?
So, Madam Chair, under the delegated authority bylaw, we have authority to move money between our budgeted envelopes. There is currently $500,000 allocated to the older adult plan. If we move $150,000, that leaves $350,000 to continue supporting the older adult plan moving forward.
But is it an overall reduction then, or are you just adding to the community funding?
Madam Chair, we are adding to the community funding by moving the $150,000 from the older adult plan. Okay,
so there's no cut here. There's nothing that, we're not taking anything out and putting 150 in from another bucket.
Madam Chair, we will be reducing the older adult plan budget by $150,000.
Yeah, okay. But I guess my question is, so you are, in capital funding, we've got the same amount plus the 150?
Yes, that's correct.
Sorry, I should have asked that more clearly. Okay, so thank you for that. And then we've got 75,000 in emerging needs funding, and we will have an emergency fund. But what we will also have is 500,000 for transitioning agencies who may see cuts because we're working right now, just to be clear, we're working with the same bucket of money, and we're just likely going to allocate it differently. Is that correct? So that 500 will help for a year to transition agencies who have seen a reduction in their funding.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I understand that today we can't make this decision, but in conversation with staff, I've been, and I brought this up at the last committee meeting. I would like to see that 500,000 stay in your budget for emerging needs, or to add to our capital funding for our community funding. So today, if committee would allow a direction, just not that we do that, not that we make that decision today, because we don't know what the outcomes of those allocations are going to be, but that if they could report back to committee and council with the results of the community funding sustainability fund, that allocation process before the end of September 2020. And that way, we will know as a committee what the effects of the funding have been on our community partners, and we can make a decision at that point if we want to keep that 500,000 in community funding. So because I'm asking if that would be a direction that,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
On the direction? Carried?
Okay. So I'll make that direction. I'll write that out. And then if you could just report back, and then we can make a decision at that time as a committee and as council on what we want to do, if we want to keep that 500,000 as ongoing operating dollars for you. So thank you.
Okay. Councillor Egley?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So just want a little bit of clarification about the redistribution of the 150 from the older adults. We've only got an ever-increasing population of older adults in the city. I've got a very high concentration in my area. I want to leave this meeting assured that that 150, or the services that 150 provided, are not lost in the shuffle somehow, that either we're redirecting staff or redirecting internal or something. So what can you say today so that I can, report out to people that we haven't left that segment of the population behind?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I put my older adult plan hat on, we are tremendously proud of that initiative. And tremendously proud of the work done by every single department that's been part of that plan over time. And they have all began to integrate a more of an older adult and seniors lens into their regular operations, given the changes in our demographics in this community. We have studied this, as you can imagine, very, very significantly, and are very confident that leaving $350,000 in the older adult plan budget is sufficient to support initiatives in that plan. And the $150,000 that'll be able to augment our community fund will enable us to more adequately serve the needs of seniors more directly through nonprofit organizations.
Excellent. Councillor Kavanagh?
Thank you very much. So right now we're just talking about the big picture, and I guess we're all kind of nervous about who's going to be the winners and losers in terms of money being moved around. I appreciate the emphasis on seniors, As you know, I have the highest number of seniors in the city in my ward, and we have some great programs for them. Probably the biggest one is the Old Forge, and I can't help but wonder how they fit into it, because they're sort of definitely a strong anchor in the community for that measure. Can you sort of give me an idea of some of these programs? Do they sort of fit into the model of the 5-year renewable type program, because they've been so long-standing? Would an agency like them have still access to the other funds?
Madam Chair, it's difficult to speculate what the result of the allocations process will be. Any organization that's currently funded through our renewable funding stream will be automatically eligible to submit a proposal under the new sustainability fund. So we know that they would be eligible. It's as much as I can say at this stage.
Yeah, no, I know I'm trying to get you to say a little more, but but it is concerning, because you know, we're supporting something that we don't know how it's going to affect our community. And overall, we definitely like the idea of long-term funding. I remember when I was a trustee, one of the biggest frustrations was, you know, getting funding every year where you didn't know if it was going to, how long it'll sustain. You need that guarantee that the 5-year mark is a very good idea. So that helps to plan, helps develop employees and programming so that it's stable. Having it for 1 year is just constantly on a circuit. So that's important. But I just can't help but worry about how it's going to affect, because there's still concerns. What is an example of emerging trends that you see that are developing in terms of funding? Not naming things, just in terms of trends.
Through you, Madam Chair. In terms of trends, what came out of our needs analysis was definitely a sense of a deepening level of complex needs that organizations are seeing in terms of residents, not only facing issues of poverty, but mental health, in some cases trauma. We know from our research that newcomers, immigrants, racialized populations, Indigenous women in particular, racialized youth, are faring much worse in our current economy, in our current society, than other populations. So we have been very diligent to build a framework, a new framework, that has the capacity to address those priority needs over time. And we're very confident that we have undertaken a very transparent process, and very proud of the nonprofit social services sector to have walked along with us on this. We have had 30 members of a community funding framework review reference committee meet with us through every step of this process. And we will do as much as we can to support agencies through any transition that's required for them.
Thank you, and I don't even have to ask about the gender lens, because I'm very confident of that with you. But I'm glad, I do see the emerging trend with diversity as well, in terms of the inflow of immigrants and many refugees. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Fleury.
I want to begin by thanking you for doing this, and thank you for meeting with us early. It was helpful to understand what was the strategy, and what are the process, and what are the criteria, the priority areas. This won't be easy. Obviously, there are groups that have been funding for many years, and our needs today and for the future are changing. So that will require that in a few months, when I believe in June or in September, there's like 2 windows there where information will be made available. There are some groups that will be knocking at committee doors and saying, hey, I'm cut. And I think it's important for us to go back to, we're planning for the future, and here are the priority environments that we're seeing. The only question I would have is, we have priority areas that are currently not equipped to give professional applications. How will the city, understanding what our priority neighborhoods are and needs are, how are we supporting? We're not going to write applications for people. I get that. We have to retain independence, but there are some groups that don't have the ability to submit. I mean, the shining star of that is PQ. PQ has a reputation across the city for applying and having professional applications, and they win provincial and municipal bids all the time. So I want to understand how we're going to equip organizations in various neighborhoods that are priorities that might not have the ability to write professional submissions.
Thank you for that question, Madam Chair. So we are, as part of our information sessions that are planned for April that I spoke about in my presentation, part of that will include grant writing workshops so that we can actually support smaller organizations that aren't used to submitting, comprehensive proposals.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none on the report. Carried? Terrific. Thank you very much for your hard work on this. I know it's been a tremendous amount of work, but we appreciate seeing this move forward. It's important. So thank you. So now we are on to number 5, which is the donation of surplus snowmobile. And I believe Councillor Fleury had a question with respect to snowmobiles in the city. Is there staff that can address that? Fantastic. Mary Gracie? And Dan? Oh. Me neither. Over to you, Councillor Fleury, your question?
I'm supportive of the report, so let's not, I don't want folks to be nervous about that. We have winter trails that are now more and more wanting to be groomed along our rivers and pathways. I had asked when at the budget consultation, at CPS budget consultation, I had asked at the time Dan to inform us if there were additional snowmobiles that were available. And what I realize is that this one is coming from fire. So I guess that different groups have perhaps different stocks. So I don't know if there's a central spot in our fleet where people would know if there's snowmobiles, but just if committee could be properly informed of any end-of-life snowmobiles that could be transferred for community use, especially around winter trails.
So we do have a system where we look at all of our fleet, and there's only a few snowmobiles left. They're with paramedics. There's just 4. The one that's going today is 17 years old from fire. So there's none coming up on the horizon, but certainly we can look at some sort of way to let committee know going forward.
So because we still have 4, how do you appropriately inform council of end-of-life snowmobiles, I guess is the...
Currently, we just do a replacement plan every year, but the units can switch in and out depending on their condition as we get closer to the end and try and get a bit of life out of something or switch them out, or if one is damaged, we might change up what's available. The process for donations right now is strictly through the community coming to councillors and making an ask for something.
So I have an ask. I've received an ask from the Rideau River Trail. How do I push that ask into the city? I guess I don't know who to send that to.
Yeah, because there's really no strong formal process, but what would happen is you'd approach fleet and we'd see if there's anything coming up.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Cavanaugh?
I can't help but jump in on this because we just had our big launch this past weekend for our winter trail, for the Britannia Winter Trail, and it was an absolute success. The snowmobile is somebody in the neighborhood, and we've got them insured and all that stuff. But obviously, that's one of the biggest expenses that of our funding that we get. And I know that the city is encouraging us to work together as a Winter Alliance, so I'll try not to fight with Matt about who gets a snowmobile, but I think that it's definitely going to be, the need is going to continue to grow because we're going to see this across the city. It's there. So I think that it would be safe to say that there's a possibility that there'll be more need of whatever. So there's a line of communications and that we can make with the Winter Alliance. Have you been in touch with that at all, or? Okay, well, I know Dan can speak on that.
Yes, Chair. Through the Winter Alliance and our dialogue with them, we are aware of the various groups that are still snowmobile deficient and would like to own one. And so to Councillor Fleury's earlier comment, we do continue to track who is looking for a snow machine, and we'll be working with Fleet if anything should arise, although, as I think was mentioned, there aren't a lot in the system that are likely to come up soon. But we are looking at other opportunities, both to accommodate, for example, storage through CIL funding that's already been put forward, and through other opportunities of government grants and whatnot that might help groups.
Thank you very much. And yes, we do want to keep encouraging those winter trails. They're fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, on the report then, carried? Carried. Excellent. So no in-camera items. Any notices of motion? Seeing none. Inquiries, I have two. Anyone else want to go first? No? Okay. So I have two here which just circulated for the benefit of my colleagues as well. The first one directed at the General Manager of Recreation, Culture and Facilities Services Department. Unnecessary plastics are everywhere around us and deeply impact on our environment. It's estimated that Canadians produce around 3.3 million tons of plastic waste per year, and 86% end up in landfills every single year. Even more staggering, 1/3 of our plastics are created for single-use products. These include things like plastic water bottles. There's about 1 million plastic bottles bought around the world every minute. It's a staggering number. Recently, Council adopted the Climate Change Master Plan, where Council approved an ambitious plan on tackling climate change. The plan calls for a reduction of at least 50% of plastics from city use as a corporation. Keeping this in mind, I believe we have an obligation to play a leadership role in meeting the corporation's targets and doing everything that we can to reduce our reliance on single-use water bottles. And I know that the public is expecting us to do this as well. I personally cringe when I see single-use water bottles for sale in our city facilities, and I believe eliminating them is one way that we could make a difference. So my inquiry to staff is, would staff report back to committee on the possible options available to eliminate the sale of plastic water bottles, single-use plastic water bottles, from city administrative, recreation, and cultural facilities, including a process by which they could work with our partners and leaseholders to encourage the elimination of the sale of single-use plastic water bottles in all city facilities. The second inquiry I have here today, again directed at Dan Chenier and his team. Recently, I had the pleasure of meeting with 2 high school students who are working on a project to eliminate what they refer to as period poverty. They are 2 very young or very inspiring young women who have rightly identified an issue that too many people in our city face. The issue is barriers to access for menstrual products, the biggest barrier of which is low income. Period poverty is a pressing issue throughout Ottawa and indeed across the world. According to Plan Canada's study on menstruation in Canada, more than 1 in 10 Canadians report that they have had to regularly miss out on an activity because of their period and concerns about a lack of access to menstrual hygiene products. This is an issue that I believe has been neglected at our local, provincial, and federal government levels. And I have full confidence that if men menstruated, that there would be menstrual products everywhere. And I challenge all of you to think about what it would be like every day if before you left home, you had to think about how much toilet paper you needed for the day and bring it with you. I don't think it would be well received. What would happen if you didn't have enough, or for those who didn't have any? Providing women and girls with access to free menstrual products will help to alleviate the burden of low-income women face while they're on their period, allowing these individuals to thrive. So the inquiry that I have today, I'd like to ask staff to assess the feasibility and cost of a pilot program that would offer free menstrual products in select city facilities. First of all, would staff be able to provide committee with a breakdown of city facilities that are currently equipped with menstrual product dispensers? Secondly, would staff identify facilities that would benefit from the installation of dispensers based on demographics, client requests, etc.? Third, what costs would the city incur if the dispensers were installed in the facilities identified above, including one-time and ongoing costs? Fourth, where product dispensers are installed currently, what is the process for procuring menstrual products, and what are the costs associated with the service? And lastly, can staff please provide guidance on feasibility and costs of implementing a pilot project to provide menstrual products in select city facilities? Okay. Any other inquiries? Okay, seeing none. Other business. I have one item to note here. Appreciating that there have been 2 formal inquiries, as well as a number of questions from my council colleagues about the enhanced security measures at City Hall, and understanding that this item is not before us on the agenda today, I believe that a staff report regarding a new corporate security policy for committee and council consideration is scheduled to be tabled later this year to committee. Is Mr. DeMonte in the room? Oh, fantastic. Sorry, the chair is in the way. I just wanted to ask Mr. DeMonte if you can please confirm for committee that as part of the reports coming forward, that you'll be meeting with members of council as well as key stakeholders, including the Accessibility Advisory Committee, as part of your consultation process.
Yes, Madam Chair, I can confirm that.
Terrific. Thank you very much. And with that, adjournment. Next meeting being March 27th, 2020. Okay. Thank you.